preparing the historical data for our balance sheet is a little bit more tricky, but the concept is same with what we did in the income statement. So let's first highlight the line items that we want to actually use in our financial model. We're going to start from top down. So of course we need the data for total assets, total liabilities, and total equity. So let's highlight those first. So total assets, Alt HH, shift space Alt HH for total assets. We also have total liabilities, and lastly total equity. And we also need the current assets and the non-current assets. So we have total current assets over here, but for some reason we don't have the line items for non-current assets. So what we have to do is later on we're going to subtract current assets from total assets, which will get us to non-current assets. Same goes for total liabilities as well. So we want to highlight the total current liabilities, but we don't have the line items for non-current liabilities. We definitely want items for cash and equivalents. We are also going to use short-term investments, which is almost same to cash. And later on when we're calculating net debt or cash balances or something like that, short-term investments are often included and treated the same way as cash and equivalents. So this is a very important line item, so we're going to highlight it as well. Receivables, this is going to be the accounts receivables. So total receivables, which includes accounts receivables and other receivables. These line items, of course, a main component to our working capital analysis. And inventory, of course, is a very important line item. That seems like it for the current assets. For the non-current assets, we want to get the property, plant, and equipment numbers. Of course, we always want the net numbers, unless you're planning to link the gross and accumulated depreciation all together. Always the net PPE balances. Goodwill also seems important in this specific company. A huge goodwill balance in non-current assets. We also have intangible asset line items that's written other intangibles. So this line item will also be used for our intangible asset schedule. But for others, we're gonna just combine them into one and keep them as non-current assets, other non-current assets. For the liability side, just two line items to highlight. Number one would be the accounts payables. Although the numbers are not significant, we will need them for our working capital schedule, so this line item here. And in addition to that, we want the long-term debt balances for our debt schedule. And in actual practice, what we would usually do is, no matter how minor, we would also use long-term leases, any debt-related balances, we're all gonna combine them into one, such as leases, long-term debt, bonds, things that carry interest. However, for simplicity in our current model, we're just going to use long-term debt for now. Total equity side, we want common stock, additional paid-in capital, and retained earnings. These three are crucial elements of the total equity side. Of course, some people just ignore common stock and additional paid-in capital because they rarely change, but we will include them in our balance sheet. So that's about it. Let's come back to our model. Before that, let's hide these 4 columns to avoid making mistakes. So Control Space, Shift, Alt, the right arrow key creates a group, and Alt A H to hide it. Let's copy this section divider, Shift Space. Let's copy it, Control C, and let's paste it below. Control V or Control plus, whichever you prefer. And it's going to be named the balance sheet. All right, we're going to start from total assets, which will be divided into current assets and non-current assets. Total liabilities, which will be divided into current liabilities and non-current liabilities. And lastly, we have total equity. We want to indent these line items. Although, everybody can understand that total assets is a sum of current assets plus non-current assets, but still, we always want to be nice to the people who are actually using the model. So Alt H6 for indenting. Same goes for total liabilities as well. And let's first link these line items first. So before going further. So total assets. Is in the bottom part, row 38. Control R. Current assets. Control R. Non-current assets, as I mentioned, is going to be subtracted from total assets. So total assets minus current assets would equal non-current assets. Total liabilities, again from the raw data. Current liabilities. And for non-current liability, we're going to subtract total liabilities minus current liabilities. And lastly, for total equity, Before going further, just one slight formatting issues for total line items. Before going further, what we want to do is we want to build a check sign that checks whether total assets equals liabilities plus equity. That's not very important for the historical data, but going on forward, when we are forecasting these line items, in the end, we should always make the balance sheet balance in the end. So not during the financial modeling practice, but after everything has been completed, assets should be equal to liabilities plus equity. Otherwise, you've made a mistake somewhere. You've maybe linked something from a wrong line, or maybe you've messed up the plus and minus signs, things like that. So we want to build a check sign. And what we're going to do is we're going to make an if statement. So equal if, tab key to start the formula. We're going to state if total assets equals total liabilities plus total equity, we're going to display true. But if it's not true, what we're going to do is we're going to calculate the differences and let the modeler know how much the differences are. That way you can have a hint on where the model went wrong. So what we're going to do, we're going to display total assets minus total liabilities minus equity to get a sense of how big a mistake you've made. We're going to end the formula this way, so it's a relatively simple formula. Let's align to the right for consistency, and let's just shift it all the way to our forecasts as well. So the good news is that it seems like that the historical data for the balance sheet seems okay. And of course, for the forecast, because we don't have any numbers in, it should all be true for now. I want to color code these line items into red. And also I've tilted the fonts just a little by pressing Ctrl I. Moving on to our detailed items for current assets. We have to create rows in between these two line items. We need 5 additional rows for cash, short-term financial assets, receivables, inventory, and others. So we're going to do a shift space. We're going to press Ctrl plus 5 times, just like this. We also need 4 line items under non-current assets. So again, shift space, Ctrl plus 4 times. So for current assets, we have cash and equivalents. We have short-term financial assets. We also have accounts receivables. We have inventories. And lastly, other current assets. Again, select these 5 lines and Alt H6 to indent. For non-current assets as well, we'll start from property. Okay, let's say property, plant, And equipment, let's write net just for explanation. We also have other intangible assets and goodwill, and lastly other non-current assets, which is going to be the plug of the non-current assets side. Alt H6 to indent, and we have the total assets side set up. Let's resume to our liability side, which will be much more simple than the asset side. We want to insert 2 additional rows in between, so shift space control plus twice, and again 2 rows for non-current liabilities as well, so shift space control plus twice. Current liabilities are main line item, or the only single line items that we're going to care about is the accounts payable, and other current liabilities, which simply we're not going to put in much effort. Alt H6, and for the non-current liabilities, long-term debt and other non-current liabilities. Of course, you can do Alt H6, or you can also do a paste format. You can always copy one of these formats. Alt EST is also what you can do if you want to practice. Under total equity, we want to create 4 additional lines. So control plus 4 times. We're going to need common stock, APIC, so additional paid in capital. We also want retained earnings and other equity line items, which will be the plug. Right, we have all of the names ready to go now for the linking. So let's go one by one from cash to the balance sheet. We have cash and equivalents. Actually, cash and equivalents, short-term financial assets, and receivables are all adjacent to each other, so we can just simply do a control down function. Lastly, for inventories, from row 23, other current assets is going to be the remainder, so it's going to be subtracting from current assets minus the sum tab of the others. And shift it to the right. Similar for non-current assets. By this time, I think most of you will be good on your own. Let's find non-property, plant and equipment. Other intangibles. Goodwill. And other non-current assets would be the rest. So from non-current assets minus the sum of these 3 line items. right? Let's highlight current assets and non-current assets. Right, for liabilities, accounts payables, make sure always you link 2018 data. And other current liabilities will be the rest. Long-term debt as well. From row 49, the company has some long-term debt balances worth 200 million or so, and that is the major portion of the non-current liabilities. Just a couple more to go. For common stock, you can see common stock, additional paid-in capital, and retained earnings all in the same order. So again, control down, control right, and for other equity line items equals total equity minus the rest. And it doesn't matter if the balances are negative. We do have some negative comprehensive income balances, so it shouldn't matter. But anyways, yeah, we've finished the historical preparation for balance sheet and also the check function on the bottom. Just one more to go for the cash flow statement. After preparing for our cash flow statement, we will be finally starting our financial statement modeling.